Celtics Reddit podcast.
Back out to Smart. Fakes the pass all the time. Three. Bang! It's Williams screen. Lobs it up for Robert Williams.
Should he know? Jaylen Brown.
Tatum. Durant, the long reach. Tatum crossover pull-up jumper. It's good. 50 points for Jayson Tatum.
Hello and welcome to the Celtics Reddit podcast. Ben Vallis here. Thank you for joining us. Hope you're doing well. We are back after what was, in many ways, an unconvincing stretch from the Celtics going 1-1, beating the hampered Bucks and then dropping a nice lead there against the Cavs. Joining us to talk all about it, Mr. Wayne Spooney. Spoons, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing really well. I would have been doing a lot better if we had recorded this Friday night or Saturday afternoon on the East Coast.
For sure.
But I'm doing good, man. I'm excited to talk about it. I think there's a lot to get to with these last two performances, I think.
Yeah, we're going to pick it apart here. Let's just start very broad, though. From the Cavs game, Spooney, what were sort of the key takeaways from your perspective?
I think the first thing is the bench mob. So they got some run in the first half, and they actually did all right. You know, I think they were -2 or 4 in, a good 5-6 minutes. And it was like hockey subs, man. Eam put all 5 bench players out there. I believe it was Pritchard, Nesmith, Romeo, Grant, and Jabari Parker at center. And somehow, some way, they actually did all right. And hell, the defense looked really good. Some way. I don't know how. And then he went back to it. And I think for all intents and purposes, that lineup completely lost us the game. The Cavs went on basically a 17-0 run between the third quarter and a couple minutes in the fourth quarter. Although Nesmith did get subbed out before the fourth quarter started when we were still up 12 or 14. So I don't know, coincidence? I don't know, but probably not. So
yeah.
I think there's a lot you could talk about, Should he have had a quicker hook on those guys? I mean, we were down 3 rotation, our second best player, Horford, who's really been our third or fourth best player this season, and Richardson, who, for all his faults, is at least a solid veteran presence on the bench. So you got to get Tatum and especially Rob rest at some point, right? So, I mean, I think there's ways he could have maybe staggered these lineups a little bit, but I get why it worked in the first half. Let's see if we can go to it, steal 5-6 minutes of rest. But man, did that implode. And once the Cavs, wrestled,
The momentum, I guess.
Momentum, yes, thank you. That is the word I was looking for, Ben.
I got you back,
it's a pretty common one, too. Once they wrestled the momentum away, it was just, you kind of felt like we could just never quite get over the hump and get it back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got to admit to all the listeners out there, I am filling in for Celtics Jay, who was a late scratch from this one, and I got the call up from Spoonie to step in and host this one. I was watching this game on my phone in the car while we were out on a family day. It was Sunday here in Sydney, and my wife was kind enough to drive while I sat in the passenger seat and caught some of the game on my phone, including the Dennis Schroeder game-winning attempt, which we'll get to. But it seemed like there was, I want to say, 3-pronged criticism or 3 targets of fan criticism after this one. One of them was Tatum, which we'll get to. And the other 2 points that you already sort of touched on there, Spoonie, was the bench mob and the league's best 15th man in Jabari Parker, finishing a -17 in this game, a team low, game low. And then there was Ime Udoka sort of maybe leaning too heavily on the whole, well, it's the second night of a back-to-back. We've got the Cavs in their arena again in 2 days' time. I need to rest my guys. And letting it slip away, letting go of the rope and never really, being able to claw back. And even though we did have I guess the opportunity to send it into OT, you just never want to be there in that situation, being up, I don't know, what was it, 17 or whatever they were in the third quarter there.
Yeah, it was 19.
19, yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, are there any positive takeaways from this game that you sort of, I don't know, you repeat over in your mind to sort of help yourself fall asleep at night, Spoonie?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the defense was still fucking awesome. I mean, they gave up 9 points in the first quarter, and some of that was Cleveland missing shots, but when you're playing really great defense and you don't get a ton of wide open shots, it can be hard to make them because you have no confidence, right? Like, it's like they say about hockey goalies or soccer goalies, like, you almost want to get a few shots in to keep you warm and keep you invested in the game, because then you let that goofy one slip through if you don't. So I think, yeah, they missed some open shots, but for the most part, man, the defense was absolutely everywhere, basically until that late third quarter run. And then even still, I mean, part of that was just the Cavs got kind of hot. But you give up 91 points in the modern NBA, you should probably win the game, frankly. We did not, obviously, for better or for worse. I think Smart did not score, which is not ideal. Well, he did. He buried a couple free throws, but he did not make a field goal. But as weird it is to say, this is like a classic Marcus Smart sentence. I thought he played great. He was moving the ball. He was passing it around. He was not taking dumb shots. And his defense is all the way back this year. I mean, he has been... I know. He was everywhere. He was absolutely everywhere, directing people. And really, Rob is just unreal at this point. I mean, he's averaging 32 minutes a night. He came into this season having played more than 30 minutes like 3 times in his career, and he's averaging 32. He had the worst defensive rating on the team last year. This year he's 5th. He's bunched up right around with all the other starters and Jay's favorite, Dennis Schroeder. And he's just basically averaging a double-double. I was very critical of his defense last year. I think he was super overrated on defense because he gets steals and he obviously gets blocks, and people notice that. But if you look, part of the reason we had such a bad defense was because Rob just had no idea where to be. He has like completely corrected that. And can you think of the last time he bit on a bad pump fake?
I don't think it happened this season. Maybe in the first game or two, maybe on Julius Randle or something like that, but for the most part, not only in the right position defensively and offensively, but, other players have been quoted after various games. I think Grant Williams most recently saying, like, Rob's calling out the shots on defense, like very Kevin Garnett style, like just making sure everyone's positioned, calling out screens and rotations and switches and things like that, and keeping everyone in check. You add to that the high field goal percentage, the durability, Spoons, like you mentioned, the fact that he's playing sort of crazy. Like at minimum low 30 minutes per game. That's honestly, it's maybe my sort of top 5 anxiety-inducing things in my life right now, which says I live a comfortable life, but also that Robert Williams is not made for that kind of wear and tear. So I hope that it's sustainable at this point, because he really has been a bright spot in, let's call it an inconsistent season. Whether or not he's playing himself into, I feel like I say this way too often right now, into longevity with the Celtics or into a trade package for a star, I guess that's a good problem to have. But in the meantime, I'm just enjoying a heavy dose of Time Lord on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think we're right to be terrified because we saw what happens when one of Rob or Al doesn't play. And apparently it's Jabari Parker as our backup center, which is just like not okay. I was kind of half joking, but I tweeted last night, like, let's just go get Daniel Tice. Like, just just trade for him. Just trade for him. We need I mean, why not, right? Houston doesn't need him. They're not using him. We need a third center that's not Jabari.
The Rockets are more favorable with the nation of China from last time I checked. I don't know if that relationship is intact, but I don't know. There might be something there. Shipping Cantor off for Tice if we can make the salaries work.
China loves them because of Yao.
Yeah. And now we're cancelled in China for mentioning
that. Right. True.
We've got to get to Jayson Tatum. It was a tough game for JT. It's been a tough season. He's had a number of games, the earliest one being against the Charlotte Hornets and then against Dallas, where it's like, okay, he's clearly figured it out. And there's almost been, despite the poor shooting, this impressive element where it's like, wow, one thing you can say about all superstars is that they are able to impact the game despite their poor shooting. We've seen that from Tatum a lot, maybe not so much in this Cavs game. what are your overall thoughts on Tatum from recent days, Spoonie?
I will say the Cavs game, I think, was a step backwards. I thought that Raptors game, I think he was like 8 of 20 or 8 of 22. I thought that was one of the best games I've ever seen him play. I think he had 12 and 7 assists, 12 boards, 7 assists, a ton of potential assists. Everything we did on offense started with him getting by his guy and then making the correct decision. I mean, he was just so good on both ends and on the glass in that game. And I thought he carried that over somewhat to the Milwaukee game as well. But last night, I mean, I think people are being a little harsh on him. Like, yeah, he's not making
shots. Anyone in particular?
No, I very much respect our good friend Joe's opinion.
That colleague, yeah.
Our colleague. Yeah, I actually don't think he's wrong. I just think we're at the point. What we're talking about is Joe. I'd almost think we should, next time he's on, he can talk about it. I don't want to make his argument for him.
We've got to let him fend for himself.
Yeah, exactly. But just know Joe has some serious concerns that I don't think are unfounded. I tend to agree with them somewhat about Tatum's game. But regardless, he's like, make 2-3 more shots a game away from really putting it together and really having kind of the whole package going. Like these are like razor thin margins we're talking about on a game to game basis. Like he makes 2 more threes. All of a sudden, in that Milwaukee game, instead of 10 of 25, he's 12 of 25 and he went for like 30, 7 and 2 or whatever it was. And he's really starting, we're not having these discussions anymore. And we've had so many overtime games, we've probably won, a lot more games. Yeah. Our record's probably a lot better too. So I am getting frustrated though. It's really hard to watch him miss all these jump shots, man.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a post on the sub pretty recently, just 3 hours ago at the time of recording, from user Peppery Pineapple. That's going to test the pop filter on my microphone. Due to a recent focus on passing on the Celtics, I took a look at every Tatum possession from last night's game, and they go on to write, so I think everyone has been a little down about some of Tatum's offensive game to start the season. I was working during last night's game, but I noticed some comments criticizing him for not passing and playing selfish ISO ball. I wanted to take a more in-depth look, as I felt he'd been a more willing passer ever since Smart's media comments. So I wrote down every Tatum offensive touch while watching. I left out 2 touches where he got fouled so early in the possession that it felt like it was irrelevant to discussing his offensive game. And then there's a really nice, obviously at this point, Redditor, you should pause and check out this post on the subreddit, but there's a really nice sort of outline of his possessions and touches throughout the game. Spoonie, what do you think this sort of highlights about this performance? And I guess like relative to his good performance against the Raptors, and more importantly, how fans should perceive this current Tatum stretch?
Yeah, I think the big thing is we as fans have tons of confirmation bias. We remember the 3 bad shots he took and just assume all the shots he missed were bad shots, right? I mean, that's just how humans think. It's what we do. So I think this post does a really good job of being like, look, a lot of these bad shots he's the victim of his circumstances. Like Schroeder dribbled for 15 seconds, lost the ball. Tatum had to pick it up in the backcourt, dribble up and fire up a deep 3. After a couple dribble moves, because we had 6 seconds or whatever it is. Like, yeah, that's a bad ISO shot. But in a vacuum, sure, that's true. But if you're watching, like, not really. Like, what the hell else who else do you want taking that shot? Maybe Smart, because he makes crazy stuff like that. Yeah, maybe Schroeder after the way he's been playing. But I do think he definitely is still working through being kind of the number one guy. Like, this is the first time he's not had basically an all-star point guard on the roster next to him. I know Kemba was in and out of the lineup last year, but the team was still designed around having an all-star point guard on it. This year, that's just not the case, although Schroeder, maybe he's playing like it, or maybe he thinks he's an all-star this year. So I think Tatum is struggling to find the mix of when to pass and when to shoot. And he's in the post a lot, which I just don't think he's comfortable doing. So I just think we need to take a deep breath, focus on when he passes when we're watching the game, right? Like let's look, like how often is he really taking these dump shots? Because they happen, no doubt about it. But if you're looking for what else he's doing, I think you'll see that he really is trying to make plays for others. I do think he's driving to the rim a lot more. I think he's making a concerted effort to do it. It's not always successful. He loses the handle sometimes. He's got to get a lot better at that. But also there's no spacing on the floor. That makes it pretty difficult to drive to the rim too. So I think it just goes back to the fact that he's a 23-year-old guy who's trying to take the reins of a team with expectations, and he's stumbling a little bit, but I don't think he's so far away from being that guy. I think it's achievable, and I think it's encouraging that he is trying to work on these things and work out the kinks early in the season, even though sometimes it's very, very painful to watch.
Absolutely, it can be. But you're right. Context is everything. And yeah, at the end of the day, afterwards, a game that we lose, like to this Cavs team, for example, you can look back and say, I wish Tatum didn't take, whatever turnaround, fadeaway, ISO shot. If you look at the passing options available to him, maybe in a split second, it's okay that Tatum decides I'm better off taking this contested shot than Grant Williams is taking, a heavily closed out three or whatever it might be. So,
right.
Yeah, context really does apply there. You mentioned the lack of Kemba. If you look at sort of Tatum's career path so far, he begins his Celtic career with Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward on the team, Al Horford, people that absolutely add spacing to an offense. And then, as his career continues on, Jaylen Brown's getting better. He's drawing more defensive attention. Gordon Hayward, obviously his stretch with the Celtics wasn't great, but he definitely draws defensive attention.
Oh, yeah.
We move on from Kyrie Irving, then we get Kemba Walker up until the end of last year. He demands attention. He can pop the three ball as well. And you look this year, and aside from Jaylen Brown, who hasn't been playing, there's not really anyone else on the roster. Maybe, I was going to say maybe Grant Williams, but probably not. There's no one that really demands, like the coach is saying, no matter what Tatum does, stay on your man. Like, don't leave Jabari Parker open. We don't have any of those guys. And if you watch, like, the defense as a whole is like sort of swarming the paint whenever Tatum gets in there. You combine that with the fact that Udoka is running more of these post-up plays for Tatum. It's crowded in there, man. Like, it's there's not a lot of room to operate. And yeah, Tatum's young. There's room for growth in his decision-making, but there's no room in the paint. That's going to be difficult. So, yeah, I think that, maybe I'm a homer, maybe I'm biased, but I think people are closing the curtains prematurely on Tatum as far as, like, what he can become and what his true potential is. And, the nature of the beast with the NBA and these podcasts is, like, we react on a game-by-game basis. If this last one wasn't a good game, and here we are. On the Tatum front, though, so with Udoka and the Celtics and their defense and how that's evolved so quickly and become part of the team's identity and become, I guess, truly the first outcome of Udoka's tenure that we can sort of tangibly look at and track and be like, okay, this is something that Udoka has introduced to the team. Clearly, that's a solid addition as a result of his hire. Given how that's progressed so quickly, does that give you hope with the offensive side of things and more specifically the Tatum side of things that with more time and more Udoka influence, that might turn around as well?
I'm willing to give him time on the offensive side of the ball. Absolutely. I think it just goes back to we really, really need shooters, man. So in the next day thread on that Cleveland game, user SR Stone 71 said, I won't deny there's an intestinal fortitude issue with this team, but I think that's secondary compared to the bigger issue, which is lack of shooting. The sad truth is that a lot of teams have better shooting than the Celtics, especially the current iteration where Jaylen is hurt and Tatum is in a huge funk. So we can talk about grit and hustle and all those buzzwords, but at the end of the day, when teams start to get hot late in games against us, we don't have the shooters to match. And I think that's really apparent in just about every game we play. I mean, can you think of another team that's starting one guy that's a good shooter for his position, and Tatum hasn't even been a good shooter for his position yet. I mean, and Horford's been dreadful. And Smart, I mean, he can get hot. He's not bad. I think he's a little better than people give him credit for, but it's not like he's getting guarded like Duncan Robinson. And teams dare Schroeder to shoot. I mean, he's making them and he's punishing them, but he's not getting guarded either. So, yeah, right now. And he's going to go through a cold streak, and he's going to end up at 33, 34% like he always does. So, I mean, there's no spacing. Like, I mean, part of it's like part of Jaylen fixes a lot of these problems, I think, in a lot of ways. And Horford's starting to shoot well, and Tatum's starting to shoot better, and Smart getting on a little hot streak will make things better. Like, it's not always gonna look this bad. It's not gonna always be this difficult. But you can only design an offense that can be so effective if the teams are just packing the paint, right? Like, all the off-ball movement and cutting in the world's not going to do anything if you catch a pass in the paint and there's 3 guys on you, and you can't punish that by hitting your open shots. So I'd be interested to see how we look when things start to normalize a little bit with the 3-point shooting. And if it's still kind of ugly, then I'll start to get concerned. But right now, I'm super confident in what Ime's done with the defense. So he's definitely bought himself probably a year or two, frankly, with how good the defense looks to figure this thing out.
Yeah, it's really impressive. I haven't looked at the stats recently, but we're definitely trending towards having the top defense in the NBA. And yeah, like you said, add a bit of shooting to that, and suddenly you've got like a top 10, top 5 net rating overall. So it's been a rough start. A lot of that has had to do with Jaylen being out and Tatum's poor shooting, but there's certainly a lot to feel good about long term. I asked this to Celtics Jay the other day, and his immediate response was no. I'll ask you, Spoonie, do you feel like Jaylen's absence has been a blessing in disguise for the rest of the team? Because they were relying on his scoring punch and ISOing him successfully, mind you. Now that he's been away for a while, the rest of the team's kind of had to figure out how to play together and try and scrape through some of these wins. So do you feel like it's been a blessing in disguise, and do you anticipate the team looking a little different when Jaylen returns?
So I'd say I'm going to middle you here and kind of say yes and no.
Okay.
I do think it's a good thing long term to get guys like Romeo reps with the starters and Grant reps with the starters. But I'm not sure any of those guys have really stepped into the void as much as we would have hoped. But part of the reason I don't think it's a good thing is if your end goal is at game 82, we need to be the absolute best version of this team. That version is going to include Jaylen Brown. So it's nice to let these guys go out there and play and get more minutes. But ultimately, like, we've got a new team, a lot of new faces, and a new coach. I think the best thing long term is that Jaylen is playing right now, so we can figure out who of those guys complements the Jays the best for the long term. Because right now, it's like, okay, yeah, Grant looks bad in 35 minutes a game. Like, I could have told you that, but we kind of have to play him, right? So I think ultimately I'd agree with Jay. I don't think it's a blessing in disguise, other than Schroeder's. It's a blessing in disguise for him because he's making himself a lot of money with the way he's been playing.
Yeah, it's in disguise, all right. It's sort of on that as far as Grant and Neesmith and Pritchard and the bench and whatnot. This is a comment from Sergio. This is on the next day thread, and they write, Langford, Grant Williams, Neesmith, and Pritchard were supposed to be the depth and upside for Jaylen and Jayson. How do you see them right now? Is there hope for Romeo? There is, and we did a very solid video on that on our YouTube channel. Like, subscribe. And they go on to say, Grant will be the envisioned Tucker/Draymond. Neesmith came before Sadiq Bey and Desmond Bain, and PP has regressed. So I guess you commented on the depth. Is there anyone sort of specifically you want to go into there? Spoonie, I know you had a post recently on Neesmith and his defense and some issues there.
Yeah, so I think the narrative around Neesmith is truly bizarre. It's like people just accept he's terrible at defense, and like no amount of evidence to the contrary can change their mind. So I literally went through every single defensive possession he was involved in, not even involved in, every single defensive possession he was on the court for against Cleveland. And I was like, I do not think he's doing bad. Someone please come here and explain to me why everyone talks about him like he's the worst defender in the league. And, there were some people who kind of was like, well, on this play, he, got beat a little more than you gave him credit for. So, all right. But for the most part, no one had it. Everyone was like, yeah, no, he looked pretty good on defense if you actually look at it. So, I just think like I did the same thing with the Mavs. I didn't write about it, but I went back and watched every single defensive possession. That game he had 20 minutes. He was totally fine. I mean, he's not perfect. He's not good, but he's not like endlessly getting roasted like we have PTSD from seeing Kemba in the playoffs, right? So play him. I want to see him play. Like, how can we draw any conclusions about Neesmith? He doesn't play. Romeo, I'm actually very happy with Romeo. He hasn't been amazing, but I think he's had his moments. He's looked solid on defense. He hadn't even played 82 games in his career, so I think for having missed all that time from injury, I'm very happy with Romeo. I don't really have any concern with him. I think he's going to carve out a nice role in the NBA. Grant, he's the 10th man. He's not PJ Tucker or Draymond, right? He's a 10th man. That's fine. He's a 22nd pick. You get a 10th man, maybe 9th. That's cool. The problem with those three guys is that they're all complements to better players. So when you roll them out in like an all bench unit, it's going to look ugly. Yeah. And Schroeder was supposed to be the guy, like, I will be the good player on the bench and you all can complement me and we can rotate in the Jays. And it was all supposed to work great, but Schroeder's had to start. So it's looked ugly. Pritchard, I don't know, man. I'm getting a little worried about Pritchard.
Bit of a regression?
He looks bad on defense, and I just think he's not playing, so he's got no confidence on offense because he's a gunner, man. He's got a gun, like, fire away, and he's just not. I mean, are you concerned at all with PP?
Yeah, absolutely. Because coming out of last year, it kind of felt like a bit of a steal, like a sort of a parting gift from Danny Ainge, basically the last draft pick he ever made for the Celtics, unless I'm wrong. I mean, the mask maybe is a contributing factor, just like the ball, as far as Tatum's shooting. People have responded to the change of ball from Spalding to Wilson differently, and therefore it's probably fair to assume that the mask affects people differently. I don't know. I've never worn one. I've never been in the trenches and put myself in a situation where I would have a broken face, thankfully. But yeah, it hasn't looked great on defense. There was a comment on your post about Neesmith from user Infinity1567. This is obviously in regards to Neesmith. They go on to write, it really seems like he's playing with no confidence right now. Ime has both him and Pritchard on a really tight leash, like you said. And it's definitely affecting Peyton Pritchard. Confidence is a factor. Like when you shoot the ball, you need to believe that shit's going in. And I think that probably applies in many facets of the game. So it's unfortunate because we've got these first round picked young crop of talent and they're just not getting those very necessary developmental minutes. They're probably too good for the G League. So they're kind of in limbo here a little bit. It's tough to see. And I don't see that improving at all from their standpoint. Once we have our full complement back, if anything, there's going to be less minutes available to them. So maybe there's a situation where Dennis Schroeder, who I think we should get to in a moment, is traded because we're not long for him or he's not long for us or however you want to spin it. And maybe some minutes open up for Pritchard and Neesmith. But yeah, it's tough because like you kind of feel like, I don't want to say we own them. That's the wrong terminology, but like, I don't know, like we grew up with them or they grew up with us. They're part of the family. They were homegrown talent. And to see them on the bench there like that and not playing and then subsequently sucking when they do play is tough. should we talk about this Milwaukee game? Because we haven't had a podcast since then, and in contrast to the Cavs game, a lot of similarities, but one standout talent from that Bucks game is one Dennis Schroeder. And a good friend of ours, obviously a high contributing, highly active member of the show, Celtics Jay. I want to be careful not to like put him in hot water here, but he kind of went off on Dennis Schroeder a little bit. It was actually the leading like, comment. After a game where Tatum, was incredible and we beat the Raptors, his first take was to really go hard in on Dennis Schroeder there. So Wayne Spooney, I want to allow you to respond to Jay's criticism of Dennis Schroeder, and then sort of add, how subsequently he's been pretty fucking amazing, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, Schroeder's been great. Jay, you need to talk down your boy Marcus Smart so he starts scoring a little bit. But no, it's just hilarious that Jay basically did a 45-minute podcast about how much Dennis Schroeder sucks, and he goes for 36 the next night. It was just too perfect, man. That game was pretty disappointing, I'll say. Anytime you go to overtime against Milwaukee without Giannis, because I think Jaylen and Middleton cancel each other out. So,
sure.
We're not going to talk about Chris Middleton here. But they didn't have Giannis. That's kind of a big deal. But I think the biggest thing I take away from that game, and it goes back to what we were just talking about, that's what it can look like when you have 5 shooters on the floor. They've got Grayson Allen out there. He can shoot. Bobby Portis can shoot. George Hill can shoot. Drew can shoot. And it's like, even though these guys aren't like amazing players, they don't get dusted on defense. They're good enough on defense. And if you kick it to them, it's going in. It makes the game very, very simple and very, very easy. So, that's going to be one of those games we just kind of forget about. And as I think I said, a win's a win's a win, man. Chalk that one up in the win column and just move it on. We don't want to talk about that one too much. It was pretty ugly. But, the defense was amazing again. That's great. And moving on to the next one, on to Cleveland.
Yeah, and we've got Cleveland again in their building again tomorrow,
So
which is going to
weird.
be interesting. Yeah, I don't think I've ever... normally it's a home and home.
No. Yeah, exactly. I've
very
never
bizarre.
seen that before.
Just a quick comment on Dennis Schroeder very quickly. It's so important that his shot is going down, because you could see the dribble penetration he was getting, and whenever Bobby Portis got switched on to Schroeder, he was just like getting to the bucket,
Blowing by him
on every possession. But like, so much of that was that the defense was guessing a little bit. Certainly not in the scouting report, but once that shot started falling for Schroeder, they were sort of on their toes or on their heels a little bit and not decisively defending him, and it allowed him to operate in a way that we're not necessarily used to, which is really good to see. Celtics Jay, if you could next call out Jayson Tatum's shooting,
please.
I think that'd be a good place to start, and then we can kind of work our way down sort of the priority level of what other areas we need to improve. So thank you for that, mate. Just kidding. Let's get to the Reddit recap very quickly, unless there's anything else on either of those games that you wanted to touch on, Spoonie, before we move on. So I'll let you talk about this post, mostly because I was unprepared and didn't load it up. But there's a post from Reddit user, Indubitably Good Sir. I struggle with that word. I'm glad I was able to get it out. The headline of their post was, "The Celtics are using Jayson Tatum wrong."
So I actually tweeted something similar about this. I've been on this for a while. Tatum just is not running pick and roll. I mean, he is, but not many pick and rolls, right? So this Indubitably Good Sir does a great job. He lays out, so he ISOs essentially 24% of his possessions. He's in the 31st percentile. As a pick and roll ball handler, he's 16% of his possessions. He's in the 79th percentile of the entire league. Not wings, not forwards. That includes guards, point guards, everybody. That's bordering on elite, especially for a guy who's 6'8", 6'9". That's actually down from 28% of his possessions being a pick and roll ball handler last year. So it kind of begs the question, is some of this bad start how he's being used? I mean, I think, Ben, am I crazy, or do you think he's posting up more? Because NBA tracking data doesn't really say he is, but I feel like he catches in the post every other possession.
Yeah, the eye test certainly agrees with that. And yeah, that lack of spacing that I feel like we talk about every podcast now doesn't put him in a position to succeed when he is posting up. Absolutely. But I'm seeing it more for sure.
Yeah, and I think that probably get tracked as ISOs a lot of the times because he'll face up sometimes or he'll drive out of it. But I just think, like, you've got this guy whose game, I mean, Tatum's game is more Steph Curry than it is Julius Randle, right? Like, he's much more of a, you have to respect the threat of my three ball, and I build my entire offensive game off of that, then I'm going to take you down low, inside out, and then I'll also hit some threes, so you better guard me out there too. So, I mean, the bread and butter of perimeter-oriented players like Tatum is pick-and-roll ball handler possessions. They all do it. They all do it a ton, and he's not really doing it this year. I mean, he is running it like a equivalent amount to what Marcus Smart did last season when Smart was like the fourth or fifth option on the team, right? So I've wanted Ime to put the ball in his hands at the top of the key and run pick and roll with Rob or Al all season long. I do think it certainly is not helping him. And I think a lot of it comes down to he is missing shots he makes a lot of the times. But I'd like to see what it looks like. Let's just do it for a couple games. Let Tatum run 10, 13 pick and rolls, and let's just see what happens, right? Let's sacrifice a little bit of defense in 2 or 3 games and play shooters and run pick and roll just to see what it looks like. Because you may need that look in the playoffs. You know, you may have to go to something like that in the playoffs. So I'm begging you, Ime, run some damn pick and roll because we do not run a lot this year.
If anyone is listening to this podcast in Cleveland, if you could just caption that or clip that and put it on a USB drive and just slide it under Ime's hotel room door, that would be very,
really
very
appreciate it. Yeah.
There's a
That
comment
spoony
on
guy.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where would you thread sort of off-ball sets and touches for Tatum in sort of the levels of importance for areas where he can improve his game?
So I think talking about not this current bizarre iteration of Tatum, like broad spectrum, the actual, what we think the real Jayson Tatum is.
The one we know and love. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the real Jayson Tatum. I think part of the problem, I do think he's pretty lazy off ball. Like, I'll just be honest. He's definitely kind of lazy off ball, but I also think a lot of it's by design. You know, he carries a big load offensively, so that's tiring. And he plays defense, man. Like, he's not amazing defensively, especially on ball, but he plays defense. He's rebounding his ass off, and he's like second in the league in minutes, right? He needs to take some plays off on offense, and he's our best spot-up shooter on the floor most of the time, so somebody's got to spread it out wide to open up the floor, right? So he has value in literally just standing in the corner. Like, he draws defensive attention and opens up lanes for Schroeder to drive. So, yeah, he's not a dynamite off-ball player, but ultimately just existing is him being a pretty good off-ball player. So,
yeah,
I think I'd like to see him work on his handle and just improve his ability to get to the rim and keep up with his improvement in playmaking and passing well before I really worry about his off-ball stuff. Like, if it's the playoffs and there's 3 minutes left in the game, we want the ball in his hands, right? So, I mean, it's a weakness, but I'm not super concerned.
Yeah, and it goes back to your point earlier, Spoons, about how necessary competent shooting is on the team because of that gravity that you talk about. Tatum being lazy off ball in the corner does so much more than your average NBA player being lazy off ball in the corner, and that he draws defensive attention just, by existing. He's Jupiter in our solar system. He's the biggest planet with the most gravitational pull. And I might say the most aesthetically pleasing as well. Some might say Saturn, which, if we were to go down that analogy even further, we'll say that's Jaylen Brown. Anyway, I digress. Tatum lazily standing in the corner is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that we don't have the personnel to really benefit from that. We're going to wrap it up with another post here to close out the Reddit recap and the podcast, and this was asked on the sub by user Dalinar:725. I hope I got that right. And they ask, and this is something that's been asked regularly since Schroeder became good. They say, can someone with knowledge on contracts in the NBA answer a question about re-signing Schroeder? So that's you, Wade Spoody. Can we re-sign Dennis Schroeder?
Yeah, I've got two very important points on this. One, shout out Stormlight Archives, where that Dalinar is from. I'm on book 2. No spoilers, please. Yeah, that's nerd shit, Ben. Real nerd shit. And number 2, yeah. So you have to have a guy on your team for at least 2 years or trade for him. And, he's been on the team for 2 years, blah, 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 in order to have his bird rights. And those aren't even full bird rights. But in that case, you can give a guy like 175% of what he's making. If you have a guy on your team for 3 years, you have his full bird rights. You can give him whatever you want up to a max contract. We signed Schroeder to a 1-year deal. We do not have his bird rights. So all we can do is give him the mid-level exception. He's on the mini mid-level right now. But the full MLE, which he is definitely not taking the mini mid-level again. That is not happening. So the full MLE is a little over 10 million. Maybe he could do that. But if you remember when we had Tristan Thompson on the team, everyone talked about us being hard capped. We're hard capped. That's because we used the full MLE on Tristan Thompson. Big mistake. But so we'd have a lot less wiggle room under the tax apron, because you can be in the tax if you're hard capped, but you can only be in the tax like 6 or 7 million. So if Brad really wanted to wheel and deal and take on money, we can't be hard capped, essentially. So I think the odds of us even offering him the full MLE, even if he's like, I'll take it, are probably pretty low. So, he's maybe worth considering if you can find a trade suitor for him at the deadline and it kind of looks like we're pretty middling or we don't need him. That's maybe worthwhile. But that is why we probably almost like 99.9% chance Schroeder is not coming back. We can't offer him anything over the MLE, and we probably wouldn't want to do that because of the implications of the MLE itself.
Yeah, he is renting his house in Boston, which as a detail I gleaned from his YouTube channel. So, I think he understands the situation here.
Yeah, he gets it.
The trade possibility is interesting, especially I'm kind of licking my lips here when I see him have these games where I'm like, he's sort of playing himself into maybe a first round pick instead of a couple of seconds or whatever it might be. And so there's a lot more than just wins to gain from these Dennis Schroeder performances. So it is exciting to see. Is there anything else that you want to touch on, Spoonie? We've kind of covered everything in our run sheet here before we wrap this one up.
I really don't think so, other than I'll say, we all need to take a deep breath. We're still 4-2 in our last 6. That defense is going nowhere. Tatum will find a shot. It's going to be okay. We're going to be good. We're going to win. We're going to flirt with 50 wins. We'll be all right. And if we don't, I'm sorry. I apologize. I was wrong again. Like last year.
Back and blame you, Spoonie, if you are wrong.
Please do. That's fine. I can take it.
The reaction from the fan base never ceases to amaze me, and I don't know why I still find it surprising after almost 4 years of doing this podcast, where literally on a game-to-game basis, suddenly Smart is untradeable, and again he's the backbone of the team's culture, and we love him and trust him. 2-3 games ago, it was where can we trade this guy? How many second-round picks?
Just cut him.
Yeah. Just eat the caps, eat the money, let him go. Send him down to the G League, whatever has to happen. It's just insane. It's unfortunate for Tatum that the poor shooting has been consistent throughout the season. But another thing that's been consistent has been slow starts for Jayson Tatum, and he's always come around. And you can't say this about many stars in the league, but Tatum is a playoff performer. It's early in the regular season. He's young. It's a new coach. He's well and truly the alpha of this team. No more Kemba. No more Gordon Hayward. No more other max players on the team. It's Tatum this time. For the first time in his career, and he's 23. Yep. Got to give him time. We can't go mentally trading him yet at this point. We've got to let the guy figure it out because, what's the alternative? Are you going to? We don't have
one. Like, we're totally fucked.
We're going to draft another generational player. Like, it's Tatum or bust. We talked about this with Corrales before the season. Just relax, let it happen.
You know what? Enjoy the valleys because it makes the peaks that much better, man. A lot of I think Redditors are young, so they don't remember cheering for like the Red Sox when they were the lowly losers. But man, it made that 04 World Series sweet. So enjoy him struggling. Enjoy watching a young player try to figure out, man, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, Joe says this all the time, but these times are where we earn our stripes as fans and where you become entitled to truly rub it in the faces of other teams when that championship or whatever success does finally come our way. So it's all part of the process. Trust the process. Did I say that? All right, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for listening. If you're a fan of the show, subscribe, share, review, all that good stuff, especially the YouTube channel that we're really trying to build up at the moment. Wayne Spooney, love your work, mate. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be back later in the week, I believe, after the Hawks game. Until then, go Celtics. Peace.